we're going to talk about Hiroshi Tanahashi and Kazuchika Okada again. But not... we're going to talk about it in a way that is going to feel like a punctuation mark. Like we're closing a book. Where we're going to clear some stuff out. And this is all based off of an article that was published on the Social Suplex newsletter just a couple of days ago. Very lengthy article by Trish Speirs, friend of the show, has been on the show from the Trish and Sarah podcast, which is endorsed by MrWarrenHayes. And Trish did, okay, first and foremost, we're not going to read the entire article. It is a long, lengthy article that Trish wrote, and it is not, I'm not trying to, this is not a bad thing. She wrote a splendid piece of work, a truly great long form, pro wrestling / sports article. And cheers to her. Trish did a fantastic job. We're not going to read all of it because, it's a bedtime story. No, but it'll take forever and it's not great content. But I did zero in on some points that we had been talking about over the past couple of weeks. Few streams and on the podcast and whatnot. In regards to what exactly happened, how did the Okada pick come together as Tanahashi's final opponent for his retirement match at Wrestle Kingdom 20 in about a month. Because, look, as you may recall, and, even if you just hang out online a little bit, this has been a very twisty story. It's not all that twisted, but it's a very twisty story with a lot of versions, a lot of hearsay, a lot of this and that. And Trish, God bless her, not only tried to make sense out of all of this, but put together the most compelling and, I would dare say, accurate timeline of events based on things that have been published by reports and her digging into her own New Japan contacts to try and get the bigger, broader picture of how exactly all of this came together. And that's what we're going to be focusing on, because her article goes in depth into the depth of the history between all of the opponents that were suggested and what kind of meaning it would have brought to fans had it been this guy or that guy, and so on and so forth. I will be giving you analysis on the stuff that we want answers on, but ultimately you should all read this article because it is legitimately tremendous, right? It is absolutely tremendous. So first and foremost, Trish starts breaking down exactly when did all these negotiations start happening between AEW and New Japan, but also with WWE, right? So this is what she said in regards to, this is what she wrote in regards to the talks with Okada. Negotiations between New Japan and Okada's management team began several months before the match was announced, with the Anjo date, which is the date that he returned to challenge unexpectedly Hiroshi Tanahashi in the ring, just long ago in November. With the Anjo date where he returned being booked in mid-September. Tony Khan, speaking on the Full Gear press call, said that the idea was first brought up between Tanahashi and himself when the New Japan president visited AEW during Double or Nothing weekend in May. Both Japanese-based sources and those in America close to Okada have indicated that it was made clear to him that Tanahashi wanted Okada to do the match, believing it would allow him to have the strongest match that he could have with his current physical condition. And that is something that I have put forward a couple of when we last talked about this whole ordeal, saying essentially that Okada was probably the best opponent because broken down Tanahashi these days needs someone, at the top of their game to be able to guide him along, and Okada was absolutely the man for this. Our primary source in Japan was informed that Okada was the man for the spot by mid-October and reaffirmed the belief a week later with the deal being signed much closer to the date of the announcement. So basically, even as we got closer to the date that was booked, there was still uncertainty. There was still stuff being thrown around, and we hadn't settled on a date yet, which explains at the same time why there was so much, what's the word I'm looking for? Where there were so many discrepancies in media where, one media outlet would say this, the other would say something not necessarily contradictory, but would, challenge what was being said and so on and so forth. It was volatile. That's the word I was looking for. The reports in the media regarding Tanahashi's final opponent were a little volatile at the time, and this explains why. This absolutely explains why. Let's go down a little further here in the article. When you read the above, you would believe that the timeline for putting together the match at the Tokyo Dome began in late May in Glendale, Arizona, the location of Double or Nothing, but that is simply not the case. Indeed, Kazuchika Okada was not the first name on the list when it came to potential opponents for Tanahashi on January 4th, with WWE's Shinsuke Nakamura being their top target from the outset. You read that right, folks. You read that right. In the week that Tanahashi wrestled Shibata in an exhibition match at the Tokyo Dome, we were told that the New Japan office were discussing approaching WWE to see if Nakamura would be a possibility for January 4th, 2026. The 45-year-old who departed New Japan for America in the spring of 2016 was the only name in consideration at that point, according to our source, who also informed us in the same conversation that Hiroki Goto would be winning the IWGP Heavyweight Championship in Osaka. As it turns out, we were not the only outlet to receive such information, with several not only being informed of New Japan's intentions to approach WWE, but also that contact had been established between the two promotions by the end of January, with one source claiming to a non-American outlet to have seen details of said communication. So, just to make sure we're all following here, Okada was not, the discussions with Okada started in May. And before that, New Japan had formulated intentions to reach out to WWE to see if, as early as January of 2025, reach out to WWE to see if Shinsuke Nakamura was going to be available. Things went quiet on the matter until April, when there was news that Jeff Cobb would be leaving New Japan to head to WWE. Cobb had been in talks with the American promotion since early March and had agreed to sign with Stamford later on in the month. In information we were able to corroborate at the time with Voices of Wrestling, it was agreed by all parties that he work the Dontaku Tour, ending with an IWGP Heavyweight title match with Hiroki Goto on May 5th. Cobb began cutting promos for it backstage at Windy City Riot on April 11, but was pulled by WWE the next week, wrestling his final match for the promotion against Hiroshi Tanahashi on April 19. United Empire stablemate Callum Newman ended up replacing him in the title match. At the time, the information we had led to the conclusion of this being another example of WWE pushing their weight about when it comes to not allowing talent they are signing to finish out previous obligations with promotions. After all, there has been other recent examples of similar conduct with the like of Ricky Starks and Stephanie Vicaire. However, an alternative narrative formed in the summer with two credible sources confirming us that Cobb's early departure was part of negotiations for Nakamura between the two promotions, and that was information they had been supplied with at the same time as this situation was ongoing. It is something we have not been able to confirm independently at this time. So this explains a lot of things, right? And actually sort of throws a pipe wrench, well, just a plain old wrench, not just a pipe wrench, it's a good old fashioned wrench, into whatever theories or thoughts that we had at the time in regards to Jeff Cobb being pulled from his New Japan dates, where we were just like, oh, it's WWE throwing its weight around, right? Which made perfect sense. But now it turns out that WWE was like, hey, you know what? We'll be the nice guys here, and we'll let Jeff Cobb leave early. You need him early? Okay, he'll be off early. Thank you. Just keep us in mind, right? Remember, Shinsuke Nakamura, January 4th, 2026. Keep that in mind. Are we surprised that WWE didn't honor this? No, of course we're not. Did you see, like, this whole political thing ended up with Callum Newman being the guy challenging for the IWGP World Heavyweight Championship, and everyone thought it was weird. But we all assumed that it was just WWE throwing its weight around. Insane. The most consistent story, in terms of multiple outlets having been given the same information, is that Nakamura had asked to be released from his contract during the summer, and that WWE had agreed to the request, allowing him to fulfill the match without any political issues with AEW or CMLL. Now, this, you will recall, I think, I don't know if it's in this bit here that I highlighted, but Trish mentions in this article that that Wade Keller, remember this during the summer, that Wade Keller had reported that Shinsuke that Shinsuke's contract would probably be done by the end of the year, which I think is that's the kindling to the entire Shinsuke Nakamura working Tanahashi's retirement. I think that's the kindling before everything caught on fire, because I think there was a lot of people, including myself, that were on contract watch for Nakamura, where we were like, he just might be gone, right? He just might be gone. And Nakamura, turns out, well, I mean, this is probably where the story came from. He asked for his release this summer, right? Now, what did WWE TKO do with this situation? Let's find out. After the shows at Ryogoku Sumo Hall, TKO WWE had stepped in and informed all parties that this would be no longer the case. The early release. However, Nakamura could still work the match under conditional approval. Confirmation of a clause in Nakamura's contract that would allow him to do as much was confirmed by Dave Meltzer in the Wrestling Observer newsletter the following week, having been discussed previously in 2023 when he returned to Pro Wrestling Noah on January 1st of that year to work the Great Muta final match, not the Kaiji Muto retirement match, but the Great Muta's final match. The potential rescinding after the match had begun to be teased at events in Japan and through New Japan's most friendly media channels has been put down to TKO WWE wanting to mess with Tony Khan as much as it would be to disrupt New Japan. Oh, what? What? I can't fathom such behavior. So you see, you understand what the play is here, right, folks? You understand what the play is here. That they were going to be on and off with this contract thing, saying, oh, maybe he can. Well, he might be released. Oh, no, he won't be released, but he does have a clause in his contract that would allow him to work the match, but we have to give the okay, and we're just not ready to give the okay yet. Like, they're fucking with New Japan. And in the for the express desire to just create tension between New Japan and AEW, and I would argue it worked. I would argue that New Japan fans, more than ever, cannot stand AEW or Tony Khan. And I would probably also, put forward that there are some staff in New Japan that, they're pretty done with AEW and New Japan and AEW and Tony Khan as well. And some of them might have been very vocal during a highly watched televised wrestling event about a year ago, right? Just a little under a year ago. Anyway, let's keep going. It feels somewhat short-sighted in that there is arguably far more long-term value in attempting to build a relationship with New Japan for WWE rather than making things more difficult for the Japanese promotion. What we also don't know is what other conditions and asks there were from WWE around the match taking place, especially if the deal had essentially been altered by a great degree already at that point. The expectation is, probably rightfully, that it would not have ended at just an okay for Nakamura to be part of the match. WWE have denied to Fightful that the match had ever been broached, but with everything we have seen up until this point, it feels extremely unlikely this was the case. So a little editorializing here by our girl Trish, but she's absolutely right. I think at this point, WWE is saying, no, we never really discussed the match. I think at this point it's a crock of shit. It was a crock of shit even before I read the article. I always felt it was, I didn't buy it. And after reading the article, I don't buy it either. And the thing that I find interesting here, right? The thing that I find really, really interesting is, like, she ponders, the question, what were the other asks, right? What else was WWE demanding from New Japan? Because it wouldn't just, like she says, knowing WWE, it could not have been just a simple, sure, here you go, just send them back before this date and everything's fine. That's not how these people work. Sat down and without a question would have made more demands, more requests, something else. You could let your imagination run wild. I know I have. It's all speculation. We'll never know, probably. Not unless someone spills the beans on everything that was being requested. But the expectation is, probably rightfully, that it would not have ended at just an okay for Nakamura to be part of the match. No way, no how. What WWE are absolutely aware of, though, is that there would be political implications of a WWE wrestler essentially main eventing the biggest Tokyo Dome show in 2 decades. There would be no issue from partner promotions if he was to participate in the match as a free agent. But him still being under contract does immediately change the circumstances around putting the match together in the current political environment. It is this that would be a fundamental sticking point that would not be overcome. Sources in New Japan, including one higher up, have told multiple members of the Social Suplex Network, as well as other outlets, that Tony Khan was made aware of the change in Nakamura's status at this point. We have been wary of some descriptions we have received from New Japan sources when it comes to Tony Khan this year, being that we had a first-hand denial of a non-reported story concerning him during the Wrestle Dynasty event. However, look at Trish go. Look at her go. That's off of my own heart. I love that. However, whilst we did receive more colorful descriptions of his reaction to the Nakamura news, it is fair to say that all agree that he was not happy about the prospect that there were communications with New Japan around it at this point. And this is exactly, as opined a little higher up, this is exactly what WWE wanted to do, wanted to create friction between New Japan and AEW. And they succeeded. And I knew about this. I have buddies that are insiders. I know people who know people, and the people who know people would chat about it. And this incredible resentment that exists from that exists for Tony Khan, that only seemed to grow during this period, is a direct byproduct of WWE fucking around with one of AEW's premier partners. And again, like I said at the time, when all was extremely speculative, can you blame Tony Khan for being upset at this? You can't. You cannot blame Tony Khan for being upset that his business partner is talking with his number one competitor, who is not only just a competitor, but someone who is actively looking to stamp him out of existence. I have no issues with Tony Khan being pissed. In fact, the opposite would have been shocking. Of course he's going to be upset. What are we doing here? But Tony was unhappy. Let's move on. No outlet that we are aware of has reported that Tony Khan shut the match down in regards to Shinsuke versus Tanahashi, right? Which is, again, a rumor that had been going around, that even I had heard. No outlet that we were aware of has reported that Tony Khan shut the match down. Rather, the line is that New Japan were made aware that there would be, quote unquote, serious repercussions. Now, she put this in quotes. So this is probably something she heard like firsthand or saw this from something very, very solid, so that Trish would put this in quotes. So serious repercussions to the relationship between the two promotions if the deal was still to be made with Nakamura whilst under WWE contract, as well as a firm push for Okada to be the opponent at the Tokyo Dome. So he didn't, again, like I said, right? He didn't shut down the match, but he had every reason to be upset, Tony Khan. Every reason to be upset. It is also something which should not come as a surprise. After all, AEW are in a global cold war with WWE, where their competitor is looking for every way they can to undermine the younger brand, whether in the US or further afield. The WWE acts of aggression have also gone past being just towards AEW this year as well, with the purchase of AAA, meaning a more direct challenge to CMLL in Mexico, who have been a partner for New Japan Pro Wrestling for much longer than AEW have. Some may treat these details as salacious, but they shouldn't. They are a representation of the difficulties faced when it comes to sustaining relationships between promotions that all have different goals, business strategies, and challenges to contend with. That's probably the most reasonable. This is probably the most reasonable description of how complicated these relationships are between these promotions, these partner promotions that are all working together. Good job, Trish. So if we move a little further here, now we get back into like the decision here. Dave Meltzer, writing in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, summarized the situation rather aptly in that, quote, whether the snag was negotiations with WWE, a decision to go with Okada since he was the bigger name and greater Tanahashi rival, or pressure from AEW or loyalty to AEW about using a WWE wrestler is not clear. The likelihood, unquote, that was the quote. The likelihood is that it was a combination of a number of these factors that saw them all end up with the decision that they did, ergo choosing Okada. And I agree with Trish here again. The answer lies in the ensemble of all these decisions. You know, whether it was, WWE playing hard to get, whether it was the deciding to go with Okada because he's a bigger name than Nakamura, or pressure from AEW, or loyalty to AEW, or just we're using a WWE wrestler. It might not be just one of those things. It's probably a combination of all those five. It's a very tenuous, very, very tenuous situation, right? Now, there were two other names that were in these discussions as well, outside of Nakamura and Okada. The two other names were Tetsuya Naito and Kenny Omega. Now, of course, we all know Naito departed New Japan earlier this year. And there was some speculation around the Naito stuff, but I didn't buy it. I wasn't into it. I didn't think it was, especially since, Naito has a tendency to, when he talks publicly, like there's a lot of working in his stuff. He's not, he rarely shoots. There's a lot of work in what he says when he talks publicly, when he chats with Tokyo Sports and all of that. You always have to grain of salt everything he says. So I wasn't quite sure. I didn't buy it, but apparently there was some seriousness to it. Let's read. Speculation around Naito was at its height in September when the wrestler was in Hokkaido for quote-unquote meetings at the same time as the promotion were touring the prefecture. Naito has only made in-ring appearances for European promotions Revolution Pro Wrestling and WXW so far since his departure, with both having an established working relationship with New Japan. Parentheses, Naito's post-New Japan life, or his post-New Japan career has been an absolute bust. His tone around this point in September, right, also began to soften around New Japan, with him telling Tokyo Sports that there is no other company in Japan he will ever wrestle for. Whether a meeting occurred in Hokkaido between New Japan and Tetsuya Naito, we have been unable to confirm. However, Naito himself has confirmed that talks took place between the two sides where they determined his interest in the spot, though through indirect contact. The wrestler told Note in the aftermath of the Okada announcement that he would have accepted the opportunity if he had been asked officially, but no further contact was made before Okada was announced. So essentially, Naito, may or may not have had meetings in Hokkaido, but he says himself that he did talk with New Japan, that there was interest to have him, right? But no one asked him officially to be part of the match, and he would have accepted it, and then they ghosted him. He didn't hear a peep from them. Completely ghosted until they announced Okada was doing the thing. Isn't that wild, chat? Just like absolute bonkers revelation. If true, of course. The fact Naito was ghosted after the initial contact is something else. With previous occurrence with New Japan, and especially this year where two prominent AEW wrestlers had agreed to work the G1 before communication was cut off, with confirmation of their non-participation only really coming with the lineup announcements. This is something I don't think anyone knew. I didn't know this. That there were two AEW wrestlers who were supposed to be in the G1, and they only found out that they were not going to be in the G1 once the fields were announced. Crazy shit. That being said, this is not the first time that New Japan does it. From what I understand, New Japan is not the greatest at communication. In that instance, it is likely that a lack of funds was responsible for the decision, and that the lack of communication was down to somewhat Japanese business cultural practices of not wanting to disappoint directly. Okie dokie. I 100% buy the the lack of money issue. I can't tell you guys, gals, and non-binary pals enough that New Japan financially is not doing well. I cannot stress that enough. It is fair to say, though, that even telling people the most basic information has not been New Japan's strong point this year, or multiple years. The situation did nothing for the feelings of Tetsuya Naito towards the company, seemingly, who declared he now had no strong reason to return to New Japan at this point. So anyway, it is worth keeping in mind, though, that the ungovernable one always has an element of work in everything he says. So you see, he had a reason to go back, which would have been to retire Hiroshi Tanahashi, but now that he's not doing it, he's like, I got no reason to go back now. Just as simple as that. Let's talk about this guy now. Omega was more of the real quote-unquote pipe dream out of any of the four, with the Winnipeg-born wrestler restricted in regards to singles competition so far this year by the management of his ongoing health issues. So there's really, I don't think there's any more interesting tidbits to glean out of that when it comes to Omega. And I think that's the end of my highlighted stuff. But Omega was on the table. It's just, it's just a question. Omega was on the table, but he wasn't, there was a lot of trepidation around him possibly doing the match and having another singles match here. A lot of people, I guess in AEW weren't quite keen on him, with his health restrictions now moving forward. Weren't exactly excited at the idea of him going to have a massive 30 plus minute singles classic with Tanahashi, right? Trish breaks down the story, the history, and the logic that would have made Omega as a choice be absolutely okay as well. And you can absolutely read that. So these were the main talking points that I wanted to bring up. These are the main talking points I wanted to bring up because these are all very, very interesting news items that confirm a lot of things that I had been talking about that I had heard and were very unpopular opinions, that people didn't like the idea that AEW ran some kind of, that AEW ran some kind of interference to keep, to prevent a Nakamura showing up. But WWE ran their own type of interference, and they probably just played everyone for fools in this one here just to create tension between the business partners, which it successfully did end up doing. Let's be honest, this is exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened in this situation. The road to get to this main event was extremely messy. Now, I guess my final thought on this is the following. What was New Japan Pro Wrestling thinking about reaching out to WWE and do business with them? What was on their fucking mind when they decided to pick up the phone and call and ask for Shinsuke Nakamura for one night only? What? At this stage, TKO is in a spot where it does not want to play nice with anyone. It wants to gobble up or smash. And it's the UFC model. And these are all UFC guys. So why are we pretending like this is something that might have happened? AAA only exists today because WWE purchased them. This relationship with TNA that everyone thinks is such a great thing for TNA, we all know how it's going to end. We all know how it's going to finish. Why did New Japan think that they could just ask a favor and we'll pay you back? Trish even underscores it in her article where she says, maybe there were other requests that were made by WWE. We don't know. Of course, that makes sense. It makes absolute sense. It makes 100% sense. It makes so much sense that they'd sit down and say, well, we'll let you have them, but, we want 25% of the shares of Bushiroad or whatever the fuck. Something where you're like, no, we just want a wrestler for a match. And the even wilder part is that New Japan did this while being close business partners with AEW, who are at war with WWE. That's not a secret to anyone. They are in a battle to stay alive in an environment where WWE holds all the media cards and the business partners, and they're like, oh, well, I don't know, maybe Tony will understand. Tony was right to be upset. Now, I will give New Japan a benefit of the doubt card. I will slide that over to them. And here you go. I'll give you this. Maybe they were just calling WWE to see if Shinsuke was indeed, was going to be released or how much time he has left on his contract. Maybe that's all they wanted to know, right? Maybe they were just going in because they heard the rumors. Maybe someone talked to someone and they're like, well, I heard that his contract's coming up this year. Oh, really? Let's give him a call to see. But then what does that do? It tips your hand. And when you have a bunch of, bloodthirsty sharks who are out there like TKO and DC are like, oh, well, you want to know if his contract is going to be up? Why? Oh, because you want him for a match? Oh, well, okay. And maybe, as the article seems to allude to, it seems like WWE was on the path of granting his request, Shinsuke's request of getting his release from the company, but they removed that off the table because they're fucking assholes. Because New Japan called them just to inquire, just to see, doing things above board. And then not New Japan, but WWE, unable to see as anything in this type of situation as them taking a big fat L, decided to bench Nakamura longer just because they had heard he could be in a big time Tokyo Dome match without them. They're like, fuck that. If he's going to be in the biggest Tokyo Dome main event of the past 2 decades, it's going to be under the WWE banner. You see how they are? You see how these motherfuckers are? Great stuff, by the way, by our girl Trish and Sarah podcast, of course, but I highly recommend reading this article. It is a great piece of work. She should be extremely proud of herself. It's legitimately great stuff. And by the way, the stuff that she brings up, my insider buddies all go, yeah, that checks out. Like no one in the dark spheres of wrestling discussion are challenging what she's laying down here. Everyone's going, yeah, it checks out. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, it's what I heard. Great piece of work. If you are listening to the podcast right now, I will link the article in the description. Other than that, I will post it on socials as soon as we're done here on stream.